Tadas Petra is a popular instructor and excellent developer. In this course, he teaches how to build a live streaming Flutter app using Agora. Thanks to Agora for providing a grant that made this course possible.
Hello everyone, my name is Tadas Petra. I am a YouTuber, a Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart, and also a developer evangelist at Agora. And this course will be covering a live streaming application where you can have multiple live stream feeds from multiple people coming into a director application. The director has control of whether they're muted, whether their video's on, and whether they're on the stage or the lobby. And then for those people that are in the stage, their video will get transcoded together and sent out to any streaming platform that you want. I'd say this course is an intermediate level course, so if you're completely new to Flutter, I recommend taking a look at some of the other freeCodeCamp courses. I know they have some great ones for beginners. And if you're completely new to Agora, I'll leave a couple of resources in the description so you could see how to implement simple video calling features with it. I will also be using VeriPod for state management. I'll be explaining a little bit about what state management is and how we're going to use it here, but if you want to dive a little bit deeper, I'll leave some resources in the description too. And lastly, I'd like to thank freeCodeCamp for giving me this opportunity, and let's get into the course. Whew, got a little cold in here. I had to put on a sweatshirt. But like I said, this app is a little bit more complicated, so I wanted to break it down to you visually. We're going to start off with a home screen. On the home screen, we're going to have to enter two fields. One is the name of the room. The other one is your name. And there's going to be two buttons because technically we're going to have basically two apps within one app. We're going to have a participant view, but we're also going to have a director view. So the first view is going to be the participant view. Now this view should look like any other normal video call that you can have. You'll have an end call button, a mute button, and a switch camera button. Within the participant view, you're basically saying you're going to be a participant within the video call that the director controls. So what you should see is basically what's going to be going out to the public. The people that are going to be going out to the live stream platforms, they're going to be the people that are on the stage. And I'll explain the stage in this next part. So this is the basics of the director layout. So the director basically controls how the whole video call is going and who actually gets pushed out to the live stream and who doesn't. So you'll have first the lobby here. So when you first join as a participant, you'll be put into the lobby. Then the director will have the ability to bring you into the stage, and then you'll be basically live. And the director will also have the ability to bring you back to the lobby if you misbehave or something like that. At the top here, we'll put basically what streaming platforms you want to go to. So let's say YouTube and Twitch, if you have entered that. And at the bottom, we'll have a menu for stuff like end call and start and stop live stream. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in this director application, and that's where state management comes in. Now, to be perfectly clear, you don't need state management here. You could definitely make this app work without it. But in my opinion, adding some sort of state management solution kind of cleans up the code a little bit and makes it easier to work with. So what is state management? So if we take a look at this application, within the director part of it, we have a lot of different states. So we have stuff like who are the people on the stage, people in the lobby, what platforms we're streaming to, whether the live stream is live or not, and things like that. So depending on how big your application is and how much of these state objects you're going to be using on different pages, you might want to split it up into multiple state objects. So you could have something like a state object for the people on the stage, a state object for people in the lobby, a state object for what type of platforms you want to go to, and a state object for whether the stream is started or not. But for this, we're going to keep things simple. We're just going to have one state object for everything director related. So something like a director state. Now within here, we'll have active users, lobby users, is live variable to tell us if we're live or not, and which destinations we want to stream to. So that is the state that we're going to be managing for this application. And the whole director page, so this whole page will be reactive to whenever this state changes. So anytime you update this, our director screen will react and update the UI to match whatever it needs to match. And of course, when we click buttons, so let's say there's a plus button to add a destination here. Whenever we click it, we'll go to a function that changes and updates this destination, which updates the state, which updates the screen. And thus we have a nice simple flow for how things get updated within our application. Hopefully that makes sense. And for the participant app, since it's simple enough, there's not too many things to manage, we're not even going to use any state management for that. So why do we choose Agora for this project? Well, first, I work there, so I'm a little bit biased, but also it makes building something like this a little bit easier than other competitors. And it also has a very powerful backend, so you know you'll be getting quality and reliability and all that stuff. Now the Agora platform will be taking care of all the video feeds that are coming in and putting them together, sending them out to the live streams, but also using signaling between the director and all the participants, whether they're muted or whether they should be in the lobby or the stage and stuff like that. All right, enough explaining things. Let's show how this is actually built. So we're going to start off with the old Flutter create command. And we're going to call this app streamer. Then we could jump into the directory and open it in VS Code. And here we have our basic Flutter app. And there we go, we're running the basic Flutter demo application. Now before moving forward, we want to add in all the dependencies that we need. So we said the main thing that's going to be running on is Agora. If we go to the package manager for Dart, we type in Agora, we will see 3 Agora plugins. Now we're going to be using the Agora RTC engine and the Agora RTM, but I want to show you what Agora UI Kit does too, because it's really quick and simple. So we have added Agora UI Kit here. So this is used if you want to set up a simple video call application. Now the plan is to expand this to allow all the complex features too, so technically what we'll be building here should also be possible with UI Kit in the future as well. So that's why I want to show it to you a little bit. So in order to add UI Kit to your project, you only really need to add 3 lines of code. We need to create an Agora client, and we need to pass in Agora connection data and enable permissions. So we're going to need 2 permissions for a video call. We're going to need a camera permission and a microphone permission. Now this Agora connection data is a class that we need to add. And you'll see it will need app ID and channel name. So what the heck is that? Well, if you go to console.agora.io, you'll see a screen like this. Now they'll have a list of all your projects. You can create a new project, but for us, we're just going to be using this project that I already have. But you should see something very similar. And when you create it, you might see a screen like this, and you'll have a thing called app ID right here. So this is basically creating an Agora app for you, and you'll be able to use Agora services, and you'll have 10,000 free minutes of these services every single month. So we're going to be copying this app ID and bringing it into our code. Now in order to not be showing you my app ID this whole time, I'm going to have a new file and I'm going to call it app ID. And here I'll define const app ID equals, and then insert app ID here. Name this file with lowercase and underscores, that's fine. But then you're going to want to insert your app ID here, but I'm going to put in my number. So there we go. Mine's in there. And now we can type in app ID here, and it will import our app ID file, and we can use that constant variable here. For our channel, we're just going to call it test for now. Then we want to initialize that client, and then we're done. So all the Agora side is this initialized, and we will just want to display a stack of widgets. One of them is going to be the Agora video viewer, which will show you the actual video. We pass in the client, and then we have Agora video buttons. So we could have an end call button and stuff like that. And that's a full video call application. Before I can demonstrate it though, there are some permissions we need to add. So on the Android level build.gradle, we need to add this at the end of the repositories. So we can add that in here. Then add the device permissions, which we already did. And the Android manifest file, add this required device permission to the file. So there we go. Now this video call should be working, and we should be able to launch it and showcase it. Oof. All right, there was apparently a bug that took a little while to figure out, but there was either a new Android version or a new permissions handler version that was released. So you want to make sure you set your target SDK version and your compile SDK version both to be 31. By default in Flutter projects, it's 30, and something doesn't like that with permissions. So with 31, everything works, and you should see an app like this. So it'll ask for your permissions. Let's give it permissions to do all that. And this little image is something we'll see throughout the video. And this is the little fake camera emulator from Android. Let me join on another device just to prove to you that this works. And I forgot, since mine is an iOS device, we're going to have to add these 2 things to the info.plist file. So iOS, runner, info.plist, and add these 2 keys in here. Now save that. This time, hopefully it will work. And there we go, here I am. So that was the Agora UI Kit. And while you can do a lot of things with Agora UI Kit, you can actually do a lot of customizations. There's a couple small things you can't do right now that we're working on adding in. So we're going to need to use the core API called Agora RTC engine. So the Agora RTC engine handles all the video and audio related stuff. But then we also need to add Agora RTM, which is real-time messaging. RTC stands for real-time communication. RTM stands for real-time messaging. And you can imagine the messaging is to send signals between the people so we can have control of everybody within the call. So those are going to be the packages driving the core Agora logic. Then we're going to need to add RiverPod. We're going to use Flutter RiverPod. That's for the state management. And then we're going to add a couple little small things like shared preferences. We're going to need this because we're going to have a UID of a person that we're going to generate randomly, and we're going to store it so we don't have to create a new one every single session. There's other ways to get UIDs, for example, from Firebase and all that stuff, but we're going to do a simple route. And shared preferences just makes it easier for you to store things locally. And then we're going to have a couple neat little UI packages. One's going to be called App Pop-Up Menu. Just like it sounds, it's just a little pop-up menu. Then we're going to have a modal bottom sheet, which is a nice little thing that comes up from the bottom, so you can add some information in there. And then last one, circular menu. So really there's three main ones driving the actual logic behind everything that happens. Then share preferences, just to store things locally easily, and then 3 UI packages. It's UI elements that we could definitely make ourselves, but why not use the things we have out there? All right, so everything's set up and ready to go. Now I have a way that I organize projects. It's similar to the MVU architecture approach, and it's a nice way to keep things organized within your app so that you can keep building up on it. So I have a folder called controllers. That's not a folder. I have a folder called models, pages, utils, and sometimes I even have a folder for widgets, but in this case, we're not going to need them. So the app ID goes within the utils, and we don't need to look at that anymore. So utils, as you could see, is utilities, stuff that you use throughout the app, but it's not really a feature or anything like that. So for example, I put my colors in here, different colors that I have for the app, and I can't even think of many other examples of things I put in here, but it's nice to keep those organized. Then pages, like it sounds, is the different pages of the application. Models are the data objects, so the different types of data that you hold within the application. And then controllers are the main things that drive the whole application. So if you remember how we're using RiverPod for state management, and then we have that director state that we talked about, so that director state is going to be within the controller. So we can actually add the files so we can envision it even better. So we'll have a director controller, and here we'll have the director model, which is the big object that we're going to be using to control the whole application. Then we'll have a simple stream.dart. This is going to have the information for where we're streaming to, and a user.dart for all the people that are going to be within the call and any data that we need to hold for them. Then pages, there's only 3 pages here. We will have the home page, we'll have the director page, and then we'll have the participant page. Okay, so everything's set up. We're ready to start adding some code in here. So we can remove this home page class, remove all this, and we'll just call it home. We can leave all that as is. Remove the title, we don't really need that. Now since we're using RiverPod, we want to wrap this whole material app with a provider scope. So there we go. This provider scope, basically a widget that stores state. So we're storing state for the whole application, so we're wrapping it around this whole material app. Now this home, we see we have a problem, but we'll add a stateful widget here called home. And now we can import that, and I think we can even make it constant. There we go. So we're pretty much done with this whole main page. We won't be touching it much more. Now the home screen, if we take a look at our design, we want the home screen to look something like this, whether you're a participant or a director. It's actually going to be a little bit different because one, we're going to need a username, and then we also need a channel name. So instead of adding channel name here, we're all just going to put it in the first screen. So we need channel name, username, and then 2 buttons. So first we need to create a scaffold, and then in the body we're going to have a center widget in which we will have a column. Within this column, let's center everything. And the children will be 2 text fields and 2 buttons. So the first text button will take us to participant. And the second text button will take us to director. And actually, let's go and set both of those up. So for the child of the participant, we're going to have a row with the word participant and a little icon. The icon is going to be a live TV because you're going to be pretty much joining a live broadcast. And the child for the director will be the word director and a little cut thing. So you know that you're directing something or you're in charge of something. So let's set up our participant screens as well. So we have a stateful widget called participant, and then in here we will just do a simple scaffold with a body, center, text, participant. And let's just copy the same thing to director just to make sure everything works. By the way, you can click Control-D to do what I did here. And I just change all the wording to director. Now, in order to get to that next page, we need to do navigator.push and then send our page route for the specific widget that we want to push on. So we want to push the participant widget here. And then do the same thing for the director, except here we will push the director page. All right, so now we could actually run this to make sure at least the navigation within the app works. All right, we ran into a little bug that didn't let us run. So in this Maven link, I had www.jitpack.io. If you have this, or I accidentally led you to have this, make sure you remove that, and then your code should run. So we have an app that looks like this, and I think if we click into it, we'll be taken to the director screen, and now if we click participant, we'll be taken to the participant screen. So our whole flow for the application is working. Now we just need to make this look a little bit nicer. So let's create another folder in here. We'll call it assets. This assets folder will where we put all our images and things like that. So let's put it out into the main directory, and there's the assets. And here we'll have the streamer. You can't really see it because it's a black background, but you just gotta trust me that this is the right logo. Now to actually add it into our app, we have to go to the pubspec.yaml, and here they have a commented out section that shows you how to add assets, but we're just gonna add ours in, and it's in the directory called assets. So now it's ready to use. So at the very top, we'll have image.asset, and our path is assets/streamer.png. Let's add a little space between this and the next section. We'll give it a height of only 5. Add some text like streaming with friends. And these can be constants because they are not going to change. Add another size box to give some space in between the titles and the text fields. We'll have a height of 40 here. And then for the text fields, we'll do something a little more special. So first things first, we need some controllers up here. So we'll have a channel name controller and a username controller. To format this to look a little nicer, we're going to wrap it in a container. And we're going to give it a specific width of media query width. So this is the width of our screen. And we're going to multiply it by 0.85. So it's going to take up 85% of the screen. This will make it more responsive for the different apps that we have. Now within the text field, we'll have a controller. This will be the username. And then some decoration. And this decoration is just going to give it a nice little border and have the text username in there. So nothing too special. Now we want a size box again of height 8 here, for example. And we can copy paste the same thing here. You notice it converted to a size box because we're not really using much else within here. We're not using many of the container things. So size box works here as well. And here we'll have the channel name and change this to channel name. All right, let's run that. So there we go. It looks pretty nice now. Now there's one more thing we didn't do is we need to add properties that we pass in here. So we have a channel name and username, but we need to actually pass it into these specific widgets. So this is the participant screen. We're going to need the channel and the username here. And then for the director screen, we actually don't even need the username. We only need the channel name. The director won't actually be within the call, so we don't need to see his username anywhere. But we run into issues here because we're not passing the specific things we need. Just simple to fix. Channel name, we take the controller we have and we get the text from it. Same thing with username. We take the user controller and take the text from it. So this is taking the controller that we have set up for each of the text fields. So when you're typing, there's a nice little thing in the background that has all the text for you, and we're retrieving that text value from it. And then we should have one more problem at the director where we do something very similar. Channel name, we take the channel name controller and retrieve the text. So now each of these screens should have the correct values that we need, and we should be good to go. All right, so for the next part, we're gonna start implementing the participant side of things. The participant is going to be a lot simpler than director. So hopefully it'll be a good transition from implementing something a little bit simpler, and then we'll step it up another level by adding it into the director. The participant still has a lot of things that we need to take care of. And since this is a more complicated app, there's going to be a lot of functions that the participant has to execute on as well. But we'll take it slow, and hopefully by the end you'll have a good understanding of how all these stuff works together. So the biggest thing we'll be emphasizing here is how Agora RTM and Agora RTC work together. So if you remember, RTM is real-time messaging, so it's signaling. It's how we'll be able to communicate information between people, so send like mute requests and all that type of stuff. And then Agora RTC will be the actual video call happening. So on the participant side of things, we will need RTC engine, which is going to be handling the actual video call. And then for RTM, we will have a client, and then we will also have a channel. So within the Agora RTC engine or Agora RTC package, this client and channel logic is within this RTC engine thing. Just made it a little simpler to use so you could add video call a little bit easier. So the Agora RTM, everything's broken down to exactly how things work behind the scenes. So as we said, the Agora RTC engine will be the actual video call. The Agora RTM client is you logging into Agora RTM itself. And then Agora RTM channel is joining that channel. Actually, let's go and initialize this and you'll see exactly what I mean. So here we're creating the actual engine, and then if we go to join channel, you'll see you have to give a token, which we'll give as no, but then we need to pass in a channel name. So this channel that you pass in here does the actual initialization, very similar to how Agora RTM does the initialization for this channel. We're actually not going to be doing this yet, but I just wanted to show it to you. So we created the instance of our engine. Now let's do the same thing with our client. And for both of these, you notice we passed in our app ID that we created for our Agora. So now we have a connection with the engine and the client to our Agora project. So by default, Agora RTC starts with only audio. So we want to make sure we enable video so we can actually see the video streams. And then set this person's channel profile to live broadcasting. There's 3 types of channel profiles. There's live broadcasting, a normal video call, and a gaming one. So we're going to be using the live broadcasting. And then you can either be a broadcaster or an audience member. They will be a broadcaster in this case. All right, so the basics are initialized and we're ready to move forward with it. The next thing we want to set is our event handlers. So these event handlers get triggered whenever some sort of event happens within our application. And there's a lot of them. We're going to be implementing a lot more of them, but for now, let's just do one to showcase how it works. So we have join channel success. You can hover over this and it occurs when the local user joins the specified channel. So what we'll do here, we'll actually have a list of integers with the users that are within this call. Now whenever this person joins, we'll have users.add and we'll add their UID to this list of users. We actually want to set state so we can update the UI with this specific user shown. This logic isn't how it's going to end with, because we don't want to just display the current user that joined. We want to display any of the active people within the stage of the director application, but we'll handle that a little bit later. So okay, here we set up the callbacks for the RTC engine. Now, if you remember, we have an RTC engine, and then we have RTM client and an RTM channel. So those have callbacks as well. So the RTM client is your connection to the actual Agora RTM thing. So this is like a personal connection to the Agora system. An RTM channel is the channel that you join. So this is like everybody in the channel will be on the same channel, but you will be the only one on that specific client. Hello, editor Tadas here. So I messed up my wording a little bit there. You won't be the only one on the client, but you will have an individual connection to the client. So this client has callbacks like on message received, and this callback has a message and a peer ID. So we go to the definition of this. So this callback occurs when the local user receives a peer-to-peer message. So when you get a specific message from a separate user to you directly, this callback will execute, and we'll just print out private message from this user with the message of this. So I don't think we'll actually be needing to use this callback, but I thought we would include it because I think it helps you understand what a client and what a channel is. But there's one that we will definitely be using. It's on connection state changed. So this one will give us two variables. Will give us the current state and the reason. So the reason is why this connection state changed, and the state gives you what's the current state. And you notice these are integers, and we can figure out what those integers mean by going to developers on agora.io, go to documentation. In documentation, go to API reference. I'm working with the real-time messaging, and currently there's no documentation for the Flutter SDK for this, but from what I know, it's coming soon, but it has the same exact things as the Android SDK. So we can get status and error codes. We go to connection state, and then there's connection change reason. So connection state, we have connection state aborted is equal to 5. So if our state is equal to 5, which means this connection state was aborted, we want to leave the channel, want to log out the client, and we also want to destroy the client. We could even add a print saying logged out. So whenever our connection state is aborted, we want to just basically clear out everything that we had going on. And we can even go to connection change reasons. We can see these numbers, and we can figure out if we want to do something specific for whatever reason occurred. We can do that, but we're just going to keep it simple for this example. Okay, so those were the callbacks for the RTM client. Now the last one is the callbacks for the RTM channel. So these are channel-wide messages. This is what we're actually going to be using to mute people and all that stuff, because we want to send a message to everybody in the channel, and then the person within that channel checks if they're supposed to mute themselves, and then they will go ahead and mute if their UID is passed to this channel message. So first we're going to use a simple example of member join, so you can see these printouts happen whenever someone joins the channel. Let's also have one for member left, just so we could have all this information. And the last and most important one will be called on message received, where we'll get a message from the channel and it'll tell us which member actually sent this channel message. So you'll notice these callbacks are named exactly the same. So we have on message received here and on message received here. But remember, this is for the client, which means you're sending a specific private message. And this is a channel-wide message. So this is like a public message to everybody within the channel. And again, the documentation even says occurs when receiving a channel message. We're going to implement this later. But for now, we can add another print statement here that just tells us the public message. All right, so there we go. I know this might seem a little complicated, but once you actually understand what's going on here, hopefully it's not too bad. So now the last thing, we have the callbacks declared. We have everything initialized. There's only one thing left to do, and it's to actually join all these channels. So first things first, we actually need to log in with the client to Agora. And here's where we run into the next problem. So we need to give a user ID to this client. Now there is a way around this where you don't have to use a user ID, but for this application we actually need to, because we're going to be using RTC and RTM, and they need to have matching user IDs. Technically the user IDs don't have to match, but you have to be able to connect an RTM ID and an RTC ID. Since we're going to be using these UIDs to control all the users, we need to figure out a method to create these IDs. And to do that, we're actually going to pass in a UID as well here. And then down here, we could do widget.uid, and it actually needs to be a string, but we pass it in as an integer for a specific reason that you'll see real soon. So then we create our channel, and you remember we passed in at the top the channel name from that text field that we got. And I do that by client create channel, and we get the channel name from the text we passed in. But you'll probably notice something here. We're creating the channel, but we're assigning callbacks on the channel here. That doesn't really make sense. So we want to move this above the channel callbacks. To be honest, we could probably move it all the way up here, just keep all the callbacks together, but this works just fine too. So the next step is take that channel and we want to join. So we have the RTM part completely figured out. We logged in the client, we created the channel, and we joined the channel. Now for the RTC, we have a very similar approach. We have the RTC engine, but all we have to do here is just join channel, and it does all of this stuff for us. And actually we define the engine as a late variable, so we don't need a question mark here. By the way, if I went over that too fast, this late variable is with Flutter 2.0. It means we're going to initialize this before we use it. And we know that for a fact because we're doing it in a init state. We're initializing it up here, and we will be using it down here. So it will for sure be initialized. Again, here, we're not going to be using a token. Channel name will be the same channel name. Optional info, we'll put null. And optional UID, we actually need it now because we wanted to have a matching UID to our RTM client. So that's why we need that UID. Okay, so the initialization, everything should be done here. Obviously, the UI isn't built yet, but I think that's the less complicated part, so I wanted to get this out of the way. Now, you know, one thing we're missing is this UID. So let's go back to the home and figure out a good way to do this. So we're going to implement the UID here just to keep things a little less cluttered. And we're going to do that in a very simple way. If this is a real application, I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it. You'd probably want to have some sort of authentication service like Firebase or something like that to give you a UID that you can keep track within a database, but we're just going to create something simple. So during the initialization, we're going to get user UID. And if you remember, we added a package called shared preferences. So this shared preferences just stores something locally. So the first time we run this, we'll generate a UID and then we'll just store it locally and reuse that same UID that we stored locally for any future video calls. So we have a function called getUserID, and then we need to import shared preferences. So this get instance loads and parses the preferences from this app from the disk. So all we have to do is try to retrieve that local UID, and we'll have two scenarios. We'll either retrieve an actual stored UID, so that means we didn't get a null value back, in which case we will set our UID right here to the stored UID, or we haven't created one yet, and then we will create it, but this should only happen once. Now I won't type this whole algorithm out, but let me explain it. So we get the current date and time in milliseconds since epoch. How do you pronounce that? I don't know. But it should give this exact time, and any time further in the future won't be the same number. So this number is a little too long. We need to have 9 digits for Agora to work. So we take 3 digits from the front, which are the numbers least likely to change, and we set those 9 digits to the UID. Once again, that should only happen once, and then we should be good. So now we can pass the UID to this participant. And finally, the back end of our participant side of things should be done. Now time to set up the front end. All right, so we have the UID in here now. The only things that's left is actually updating the UI. Actually, there's a couple more things left. We have to add some more handlers here. So for this, we're gonna have to do a little bit of logic here to send the current user's information. And when this person leaves, we want to clear all the users that we're seeing too. Then also on message received, this will be a big part of the application, so we'll have to implement this. But for now, let's just focus on the UI, get this looking right, and then we will be able to see our video call with just this current user. We can actually add this leave channel handler in here, so whenever we click end call or leave the channel, we clear all the users in there too. And now we can move this to do inside the join channel success and rename it to add join channel logic. All right, now let's move on to the UI. So we're gonna have a scaffold with a center and then a stack of widgets. Now the 2 widgets we'll have here is a broadcast view and a toolbar. So broadcast view will be the actual video feed we see, and then layering on top of it, we'll have a little toolbar so we can end the call and things like that. So for the broadcast view, we'll have a child of expanded because we want it to fill up the whole screen. And then in here, we will have an RTC local view and a surface view of that local view. But we need to import that. We can do that right under the RTC engine. So we'll keep the remote view in here because we'll need it. Let's ignore the prefix because I don't know. I think it looks a little bit nicer this way. You can of course follow the recommended library prefix if you want, but we'll keep it like this for now. So then this takes our local Agora view and makes a view out of it pretty much. And apparently we don't even need the container. Now for the toolbar, I feel like it's easier just to show it all to you at the end instead of typing it all out piece by piece. So we will have 4 buttons. You'll see a lot of errors right now because we haven't implemented anything else because I want to take it step by step, but we'll have 4 buttons. Each one of them will do something simple. So this one will toggle your mute. This one will end the call. This one will disable your video, and then this one will switch your camera. So each one of them has a function that needs to execute, and some of them will need to hold a state actually. So for this one, this button, it will look different depending if you're currently muted or if you're not muted. Same thing with the video disabled. So let's add those two states in here, and they both will start out as false. So you're not muted in this case, and your video is not disabled. And now to actually implement these functions. So first we have the on toggle mute function. In this one, we will just set the state of that muted variable to not be muted. So that just changes the state locally, but now we need to change that state within the actual video call. So we do engine.mute local audio stream. And we just set it to the variable whether it's muted or not. So this will work for both cases, whether we mute or unmute. We'll have something very similar for on toggle video disabled. So this is for the button that turns our video off and on. And instead of mute local audio stream, we'll have mute local video stream. And instead of a muted variable, we will have the video disabled variable. So almost exactly the same. Now to change the camera is even easier. We have on switch camera. So here we just call the engine and everything will happen magically. And then finally, the last one is on call end, where we need to pass in the build context. And all we will do here is navigator dot pop the context, so we go back to the previous screen. Now you might say that doesn't really end the call, that just jumps you out of the screen. But we're going to handle that in a pretty nice way where we will add a dispose method here. So here we'll basically clean up this whole video call and whole RTM connection so that we have a fresh slate whenever we go back into it. So first things first, we want to leave the channel for the video call. Actually, before we even do that, we can clear the users that we have. So clear this local variable of users that we have. Then we leave the video call channel, and we can destroy that video call engine overall. Then this is the RTM channel. We can leave this channel as well. Then log out of the client. This is the RTM client again, and then destroy the RTM client as well. So we take out care of the local state, we clear it, we leave the channel and destroy the video call. Then we leave the RTM channel, log out of the client, and destroy the client as well. And there we go. So that's a nice way to handle all that end call stuff, because whenever you leave, even if you click the back button, it will all execute this end call logic. So now we should be actually able to run this project, and we will just see the participant. And when you click the participant button, you'll be jumping in a call with just yourself, and we should be able to see that person. And since we're running it on Android, the way it works is they have like a emulator camera, which is just this little pixelated image that they showed that pretends like there's a camera there. Well, we ran into some issues. I tried to debug it a little bit. So if there's no users there, I put out so that it shows no users on the screen. But if we try to join, you'll see no users at first, then the user joins, but it's just a black screen. And when we leave, we get an exception called. Now this is because we missed a very important step. We need another package called permissions handler. Now with this package, we'll be able to ask for permissions to the camera and to the microphone. And you can't really have a video call without permissions to that. So that was what we were missing. So we're going to need two permissions. We need permissions to the camera, and we need permission to the microphone. And we need to request both those. So this is for the participant view, and we need to do the same thing for the director view. Actually, I'm not sure if it's necessary for the director, but if you want to add some functionality where you could bring the director in as well, then you definitely need this. So now let's try to run it one more time. All right, so username is Tadas, channel name, we'll just call it Tadas again. Join as a participant. We want to allow while using the app, and we want to allow while using this app. So we have no users at the beginning, and then we get this little Android emulator. Beautiful. Now we should be able to mute this emulator, and you'll see the state changes here. Should be able to turn the camera off. And I think this doesn't work because it is an emulator, so there's no camera to really turn off. And then we can switch camera, because that works. So there's like the back camera of the emulator. And then we can of course end the call, and it'll jump us back here where everything gets destroyed. So all right, that's the basic part of this application. Hopefully you understood all of it, because it's only going to get more complicated from here. Or actually, maybe it's not that much more complicated, but there's definitely more pieces being added onto what we already have here. So if you understood this participant section, this is, I think, the most complicated part of this whole course. The rest, we're just going to be adding on more stuff and making it all work together nicely. Okay, so we got the participant mostly handled. Now it's time to start with the director app. We're going to come back to the participant once we have the active users and the stage users all set up, so that we can send them over here and we display a different view. But now if you remember the director application. So first we want to set up this director state. This is going to be our state object that the director part of the application responds to whenever it changes. And here we're going to have the active users, lobby users, and then some other little things. But let's focus on these active and lobby users first. So this active users is the one thing that we're going to have to go back to the participant side of things, because we want to not display just yourself, but we want to display the active users within the actual call. So to set up our state, we need to first create our director model. So this is the actual data piece that we will be tracking. This is the specific state. So this is what types of data we're going to be tracking. And we will have VervaPod create an instance of this data and use that instance as our state object for the application. So we will have a class called director model. Now I realize my file naming isn't the most consistent. For these I just have stream, and this one's director model, but I think it just made sense in my mind because we have a page director. We don't want to have a model director and controller director too. So just to differentiate this a little bit from the director page. So within the director model, we'll take a lot of the things we had in the participant side of things. So remember, we needed an RTC engine, we needed a client, and we need a channel. So we will need those same exact things within our director. And for now, we're just going to have 3 more things in here, and that is a set of active users, a set of lobby users, and the local user. So sets are pretty much lists, but you can only have one occurrence within that list. So we're going to have a list of active users, our list of lobby users, and then the local user, which is the director. And here we could add a constructor. So we start off with an empty set of both users, and then we will add a copy with method. So I do this using an extension called Dart Data Class Generator. And then you do command period, and you can generate a copy with class. So this will allow you to change one thing within the object and still have the object. So let's say you added a lobby user to the active user. You can copy with the instantiation of this director model that you have, except add a value to active user and remove one from here, and then you'll have a new state object. And before we go forward, we're actually going to change something up a bit. So we're going to create a user class as well. So this user class will be called Agora user. And the type of data we'll need here is a UID, whether we are muted or not, whether the video is disabled, then a name for the user, and a background color that isn't too important, but it makes it look a little bit nicer, and I'll show you it later. Again, we need to create a constructor for this. And same way as we did before, we will create a copy with class. So if the user goes from muted to unmuted, we can change this one variable and have an object with a new state. Now, if we go back to this director model, we can actually change all these ints to be Agora users. So now we're ready to go. One more thing, let's jump back in here. So we have this list of users. We actually want it to be a list of Agora users. Instead of just adding the UID, we will add an Agora user with UID of UID. So we can keep things consistent throughout the app. All right, next thing is setting up the controller. So this is the workhorse of the application, the behind the scenes state manager of the app. We will be using VervaPod. Like I said, if you're not familiar with VervaPod and state notifiers specifically, there's some tutorials in the description that I would recommend to take a look. But a state notifier pretty much holds this state. You can create functions in there that update it. We call those functions through this director screen. So we call those functions, they update the state. And since it's a state notifier, it will notify whoever is listening to update their current UI or whatever it is they need to update because the state has changed. So that's the gist of a state notifier. So to use a state notifier, you need to create a state notifier provider. And we're going to go one step further and auto dispose it. So this auto dispose is basically whenever we stop using this provider, it will dispose itself. Now within here, we need to give the type of what our state notifier is going to be and also what kind of state we'll be managing. So let's create our state notifier. We will have a director controller that extends state notifier. And the state that we will be managing is called the director model. Now there's this reader that you will see us passing in. This reader is super important. So this allows you to read the state of anything within the provider scope. So any controllers that you have within the provider scope, and if you forgot what the provider scope is, it's this thing that we surround the whole application with. So anything within this has access to that read, and we're able to access any other controller that's within our app pretty much. And during the first demo, I used another provider somewhere else, but in this case, we might not even use it. So then here we need the type of our state notifier. So we can just actually copy this, paste it here. And then the second thing we need is the type of the state we're holding as director model. Then all we need to do here is return this director controller with our reader. All right, there we go. So our state is all set up now. We won't be doing anything right now with the state, but just know it's there and we're ready to work with it whenever we need to. But the thing we're gonna do now is actually set up our director screen before any of this. So to do that, we're gonna just take the scaffold and wrap the whole thing with a consumer widget. Now this consumer widget has a required argument of builder, and we will take this scaffold and return it just like that. So what is this consumer? So to explain the consumer, I went to the documentation. You can find all this through the riverpod.dev website. In the reading about providers, then there's a consumer over here. And what they say about consumers is that it can be used to listen to providers inside a stateful widget or to rebuild as few widgets as possible when the provider updates. So this is the thing that actually listens to the changes within our provider, in this case, a state notifier provider, and updates our UI to look how we want it to look based on the current state. So in here, you'll see this watch thing. We will use this watch to look for the director controller dot notifier. So let me type one more thing out and explain these as well. So then we have the director model, which will be our director data, and we will watch director controller. Okay, so what's going on here? So when we just watch our director controller directly, we get this director model. So we get the current data within that provider. When we do director controller dot notifier, we get the director controller. So we get this first part. And if you see, if we actually hover over the notifier, we get the director controller here. So this director controller will give us access to all the functions we need to update our data. And this data will give us the current data that we need. So just as a quick example, we might do director notifier dot user or something like that. But then we'll have a text widget that is tracking the director data active users element at 1 muted. So this is a long example, but pretty much we have one thing that will do the actual muting of a specific user, but then when we get that user, maybe user 1 out of the active users, we can read its state from the director data. Okay, so now everything's ready to go, and now time to implement all these features. So we're going to start off with the initialization and pretty much them joining the call. We want to initialize this video call and actually join the call from the director point of view. Now, I won't be showing the director camera or anything, but we still want him to be within the call so he can control everybody. So the two main functions are going to be join call and then also leave call. Now, the join call is going to be a little bit more complicated, but the leave call, if we go back to the participant screen, is going to be the same exact way as we did here. Except this time we don't need to clear any users because we're holding the state within this director controller. You notice we get some errors here because we don't have a private variable of engine declared. But remember, we have a state of director model, and the director model has engine, client, and channels. So what we can do is we can create a cursor like this and then just type out state.engine. And everything will work, but we'll get this because in this case, the engine isn't a late variable. It's actually something that we'll have to make nullable due to the way this whole director controller is set up. So that's how we're going to leave the call. Now to initialize it, we're going to break it up a little bit. We're going to have a function called initialize, which will be a local function that does all the initialization. So remember, the two main things is we need an engine and a client. Same way we did here, we want to initialize Agora. First things we did was create the engine and the client. If you remember, we created the channel a little bit lower in the whole process, and that's exactly how we're going to do it here. Actually, to make it easier on ourselves, we could literally just copy paste this here. But we're declaring these here, so we need to set them RTC engine to that, and then import this as well. And also import Agora RTM client. And import app ID. So now we initialize it, but they're initialized into local variables. We want to actually add this to the state. So since this is a state notifier provider, every single time we want to update the state, we have to set it with a new state variable. So we're not amending it. You use a change notifier for that. For a state notifier, we're setting a completely new thing. Of course, for this initial time, that obviously makes sense since we're creating an object for the first time, but this is a key point to remember about state notifier and state notifier providers is that you're going to have to update the state every time and reset it to that state variable. And that's why we implemented that copy with function here. So because we could take all the previous things that we don't want to change and copy with the new values. Okay, so we have initialized. Now we need to do this whole middle section. And then again, we could go to the participant side of things and we could pretty much copy paste this. Obviously, we're going to need to update specific parts, but the essence is very similar. So wherever we see engine, we need to do state.engine. Wherever we see client, we need to do state.client. We actually get some issues here because this is named the same thing, but we're going to change it to st instead. And now the last one is the channel. We can change to state.channel. So on join channel success, we don't need to do anything here. We're just going to print out director and the UID. So we could just see if they joined here. Leave channel. We don't really have to do anything here. And the rest of the event handlers we'll handle a little bit later. So here to log in, there's no widget necessary because we're actually past the channel name and the UID. We could just remove that. And actually the one thing that is definitely hard to catch here is we're setting the state.channel. If you remember, I mentioned we reassign that state variable every single time if you want the UI to update. So this doesn't really work for us. What we want to do instead is state.copy with channel and then pass in this channel that we're waiting for. So now this will create the channel and we'll be able to access that state.channel whenever we use it. So now we got all the setup for Agora and RTC and RTM set up, and we can close this function a little bit until we need to add those event handlers and it won't clutter up too much stuff. Let's close this initialize and we can even close this leave call. So now we want to test it out and make sure that we get this director and the UID printed out. So like I said, we're going to do that in the init state where we try to join the channel. And in here, since we don't really care about the return of that, we're going to read our director controller.notifier. Click the join call function and we have a channel name that's passed into this widget and we have a UID that's also passed into this widget. Or so I thought. I guess it's not passed in yet. So we want that to be passed in. All right, we've got it on the home screen and then the director screen now as well. So this context.read, if we look at the description, it reads a provider without listening to it. So this watch, we're listening to all the changes and we want to update depending on what's going on here. And here we just read it and we forget about it. So we would just call that join call function, let it do the rest, and we don't even have to worry about it. So okay, I think the director application should be working now. If we run it, we should see our emulator pop out a director with the UID printout, just like that. And then we'll know everything works on this end. Okay, so we were able to get to this screen. We see that the stored ID is 634.657.764. And when we join the director, we should see something very similar. So username will go with Tadas here, click director. We get to the director screen and director, boom. 634.657.764, the same exact UID as you got there. So it seems like everything works. We're able to join the call. Now we can move on to the next section, and that's actually bringing on people into the lobby and into the stage and managing multiple users within the call. And we're going to do that by going to the director controller and then this join call function. So remember I said we're going to add more events to the event handler. We're going to have an event for user joined and user offline. Now in this first section, let's just print out that the user joined so we can have all the details in there. And here we're just going to have to implement two functions. So we're going to have add user to lobby, and we're going to need their UID. And then when the user jumps offline for whatever reason, we want to remove user. Again, we'll need to define which user we want to remove. Now let's close up this join call function and implement those two functions. So the first one we're going to have is the add user to lobby and remove user. And we'll see these errors that we had here go away. Now we just need to implement them. So these two functions are actually pretty straightforward. We just need to add a user into our lobby users set. So once again, since this is a state notifier, we need to reset that state variable, and we'll do that with a copy with. And we need to update the lobby users value. We're going to do that by taking the old lobby users, and I forget what this is called again. So this is called a spread operator. You put these three dots before a list and you get all the values within that list added into the previous list. And same thing works with sets. So here we're taking all the lobby users, putting them in a list, and then at the end we will add another lobby user, which will be defined as an Agora user. UID, we're getting that passed in. We want them to be muted at first. We want their video to be disabled at first as well. The name, we don't have that part sorted out yet. Well, actually, instead of naming it wait, we'll name it to do. To dude. And background color, we also don't have it sorted out, but we'll set it to blue for now. We'll do that real soon, but let's implement the remove users and then also allow them to be moved into active users as well. So the remove user is actually a little bit more complicated than the add user to lobby, since we need to check in both the lobby and in the active user state, but it's still not too bad. So first, let's create some temporary sets. And then all we have to do is loop through all of these people in the active users list and in the lobby users list. So you see this is a nice for loop that goes the length of the active users, checks if the element at that user is equal to the UID which we want to remove, and if so, remove it from that list. And once we have that, update the state with our new active and new lobby users. Now we're going to switch a little bit to the UI side of things so we can actually see this stuff working in action. But before we do that, we're going to set up the base of the next two functions that we're going to need to add. So we had add user to lobby, remove user, but there's two more functions that we need. And that's to be able to promote the user to an active user while they're in the lobby, and to demote that user from an active user back into the lobby. And I guess before we even go to that, maybe it makes sense to actually implement these. They're not that much more complex than these other functions. So to promote the lobby user to an active user, we want the temporary lobby of all the current lobby users. And then this temp color and temp name is this name and color that were assigned right here. They're obviously not initialized, but we want to pass that value on to the active user as well. So similar loop, we loop through the temporary lobby. We check when the UID is equal to the UID that we want to promote. Let's save this temporary color that we have. So from this Agora user, we're just copying these values into a temporary variable and then removing that person from the temporary lobby. After we remove it, we need to set the state again. So now the active users will be the previous active users plus a new Agora user with UID, background color equal to temp color, and their name will be equal to temp name. Okay, so we updated the active users to have the new active user, but remember we need to also update the lobby users to use the new lobby users without the specific person in there. And now we could pretty much copy paste the same exact thing. It's a very similar code for the demotion process, but wherever we see lobby, want to change to active, and then wherever we see active, we want to change that to lobby. The only difference here is we want to make sure they are muted and that their video is disabled. Okay, so even that's added in now. So the management of all the users going between the active users and lobby users is all complete. Now let's implement the UI so you could actually see it in action. So for the UI part, we might go a little bit faster just because the UI I think matters a little bit less. How the actual back end of it works I think is the most important part of this course, but I still wanted to cover the UI here. So we have our whole scaffold wrapped in this consumer widget. So if you remember, this will keep watching our state for any changes and we'll be able to update our UI whenever any of those change. So inside the scaffold, we will actually be doing a custom scroll view because we can have a bunch of people within the call, within the lobby, within the active users, and we want it to be able to scroll nicely. And then this will be implemented using slivers. So the first section, we will have a sliver list, a sliver child list delegate, and here we'll just add a nice safe area where for now we'll just put the word director in there. So if you don't know what slivers are pretty much little pieces of code that work well within a scrollable view. And so the sliver list is very similar to just a widget within the sliver, so like a nice row within a sliver view or within a custom scroll view. So the next part is we're going to check whether the users are empty or not. So we're going to take the director data, we're going to see if there's any active users, and if it's empty we will just display another sliver list that says this is an empty stage. But this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Here we'll add a sliver grid. So for the sliver grid, we'll need a delegate and a grid delegate. So for the grid delegate, we're going to define something called a sliver grid delegate with max cross-axis extent. So this section pretty much defines how big each of your children are going to be. So here we define the maximum extent of the cross-axis for each tile. We want it to take up half of the screen, and we want it to have some spacing in it too. And the way we get half the screen is we need to get this size object, and we're just going to define it up here because we'll probably use it in a different section as well. So we define the size by doing media query context.size, and this returns the size of how many pixels is the size of our screen pretty much. So we take the pixels of our screen, divide it by 2. That's how much each grid element is going to have, but we also want to have it give us some spacing of 20 pixels, and that will give us the look that we want. Then there's a delegate, which is the actual child. So this defines what we want each child to look like and how many children there is going to be. So here we'll use a sliver child builder delegate. So in here I just decided to copy paste and make it a little bit easier, but let me explain it to you. So I have this sliver child builder delegate where we get the context and an index for which child it is. So a total child is going to be the active users.length, so how many active users we have, and then each child will have the following design where we'll have a row and we expand it and then create this stage user. Now the stage user, I'll just paste it in and then we'll set up the rest of it and show you what the UI looks like and go through this in more detail, because I think it's kind of hard to imagine just with words. Okay, and then we put a little divider in between. So once again, using a sliver list, and here we'll just do a divider with thickness of 3 and then some indents on the side. And then literally a copy paste of this above thing for active users, except the same thing for lobby users now. And again, we need to implement this lobby user, but I'll just copy paste it and it's the same layout as the stage user. but I think it'll just be easier to showcase when you could actually see the UI as well. So I think that's the UI for the most part. I know there's a lot of copy pasting here, but we're going to go through it right now after we start it up so I could actually showcase you with an example app and what each part actually does. Okay, so we have username. We'll just call it director. Since this username doesn't really matter, channel will go to Tadas. We'll click director, and we should see this weird director text at the top. It's there for a reason right now. You'll see it soon, but we could have just added an empty container there. Actually, let's do that just to make it a little bit less cluttered. So yeah, with an empty container, it's a little bit less cluttered, and we have the stage and the lobby here. Now I'll actually need to join from a different device for the first time. If you remember in the director controller, when we said when we join, we have a color of blue and the name is to do. That's what we get here. This is why we set the colors. So we're gonna let the people input their colors and have their names appear here, but for now it's to do and the color blue. So this is the design that we have. And there's actually one piece I missed to make it look a little bit nicer. Actually, within this scroll view, let's add some padding around this. And we could actually keep it at 8. So now it's going to look a slightly bit nicer. So back to the lobby user. Let's see what we did in order to get this UI. So we use a clip R rect. So this takes the rectangle that we created. We created the blue rectangle and takes off a little bit of the border. Now in this case, we actually check if the video is disabled before showing our stack of widgets. If it's not disabled, we'll actually show their view. And I realize this probably isn't necessary anymore because as a lobby user, your video should always be disabled. So we could simplify this a little bit. So within this clipped rectangle, we have a container that has the color of blue that we passed it in with. So this is we take the lobby user, and at that element, we take their background color value. So the background color value is blue. If for some reason there's some error with this background color, we'll display black. And if there's no name, we display error name, but we take that lobby user at that specific element and we display his name. And this one we have to do. So I guess we could have not added to do or a color. In this case, we would just get black and an error name. And then this is all within the stack. So on top of it, we have a little container with, again, a border radius of 10 to fit into the corner. And that's what this is. So it's like a little button that fits into the corner. We made it a little transparent black. And whenever we press on it, we will promote this user to an active user. And if we set everything up within the director controller correctly, when we press this button, we should be taken into the stage. The video should come in of me, and we should have a very similar UI on the stage. So let's try it out now. Ta-da! So here we go. So for the stage user, we have a very similar UI. We'll have the same rectangle that we had here, except now we actually care about the surface view that we would have, and then we want to put buttons on top of that surface view. So we'll have different buttons, one to either bring the user back into the lobby like this, or to turn off their video, or to turn off their audio. And if their video is turned off, we'll have a nice video off screen. Then this section takes that background color that we have from the user, puts it at the bottom corner, and then takes their name and adds that here, as long as, you know, their name's available. And I notice we have these buttons over here. So I commented some of the functions out because these aren't implemented yet. But when we click on these, we'll toggle the other user's audio and the other user's video. These buttons have a very similar setup as what we saw in the lobby user, except there's 3 of them now. And they also change colors depending on the state. So when the video is disabled, this will be red. When the video is enabled, this will be white. And same thing with the mic muted. So that's what the stage user widget looks like. So the next step we're going to do is actually implement these toggle user audio and toggle user video functions. So these, when we see the word toggle, that's when we're doing it as a director. We're toggling them on and off. But there's one thing to remember is that the participant user can actually click these toggle buttons on their own side. And we need to update these states based on that as well. And I'll do that through the event handler, where we'll find there's some functions to check whether the user has updated the audio or video. We will be adding 4 new functions here. So first one will be toggle user audio. We'll need to pass in which index of the user is, So in the UI, we actually know which active user needs to be toggled, so we can just pass that index directly, make it a little easy on us. And then if we want it muted, we will send a message to mute, and otherwise we want to unmute, send a message to unmute. Now I might be asking, why are we sending a message instead of unmuting them directly? So this mute functionality is actually going to be us sending a request for the user to mute themselves. And actually, maybe that makes it more clear to start with the update user audio then. So this gets a little bit complicated because, again, we need to rewrite the whole state object here. So what we're going to do is actually take the whole Agora user. We're going to find the element where the UID equals the UID we pass in. We're going to set that to a temp variable. And we have a temporary set of active users. We're going to remove that specific temporary user. And we'll add that user back in with whatever mute state that it needs to be added in with. Now we just reset that state or reassign that state with the new active users. And that should technically work fine. Now there might be a better algorithm to do this. There might be a simpler way, a more efficient way, but this works just fine. Now let's copy this function and change this to update user video instead. So same logic here. We're going to find that user within the active users list. We're going to create a temporary set, but then instead of copying muted, we're going to copy video disabled. Now we need to execute those functions when an event gets triggered. And the event that we want to get triggered is remote audio state changed. And for the other one, it'll be remote video state changed. And here we will check if state is equal to audio remote state decoding. And if we take a look at what this means, it means remote audio stream is decoded and plays normally. So that means we're unmuted and we should be playing. And then we can actually just call that update user audio with the UID and muted with false. Then otherwise, if state is equal to audio remote state dot stopped, we want to update user audio to be muted in this case. Now, very similar thing here. So we need to change this to video. And change this to video disabled. So we can actually test this out on our device to see if it updates to the correct color. All right, again, the username doesn't really matter. Channel name, Tadas. We go to director. Nobody here. I'll join on my end. Here we have a participant. I'll bring this person into the stage. And there we go. I'm muted, and you can see the red icon. If I turn on my camera, you can see video off and camera turns off. If I turn it back on, everything seems to be working well. Okay, so that section was if the user mutes themselves on their end. So we have it updating accordingly. Now this last part is we need to be in control of them as well. So we have toggle user audio and toggle user video. We had toggle user audio almost implemented. Yeah. So we need to be sending a message to mute and unmute them. And this is where Agora RTM comes in real handy. So we're going to send them a message. They're going to mute themselves. And then through this function that we implemented up here, update user audio, we will get their updated state here, but they will pretty much be muting themselves. So what we want to do here is take the state, and it's going to be a channel-wide message. So we're going to send a message, and the message is going to be formatted like this. So we got RTM channel from text, not RTM channel, RTM message from text. And if we're already muted, that means we want to unmute. And we want to make sure to give the UID of who we want to unmute. So our message is going to say unmute followed by UID. Same thing here. Except here, we are now muting with that ID. Now we can copy paste this and change this to toggle user video. Instead of muted, we will just say enable. If enable, we'll use the word disable this UID, and then if it's already enabled, we will enable it. So the next part of this is we need to accept these messages and do the correct actions upon these messages. But in order to not jump around everywhere, let's add all the other RTM send messages in here. So if you remember back to this drawing, the participant view, you shouldn't be seeing yourself, right? We need to be seeing all the people within the stage. So we need to somehow send all the users that are within the stage to the participant. And this is going to be the last type of message that we're going to be sending. So we're going to send audio mute and unmute messages. We're going to send video enable and disable messages. And we're going to send active user messages. So these are going to need to be executed every single time something changes with the user. So all 4 of these functions will need to have some sort of active user message. I'll actually create another util here. We'll call it message.dart. Now these helpers are going to be used to make it just slightly easier for us to work with sending all the list of active users. So we're going to have a class called message, and it's going to have a function inside that returns a string because our RTM message needs to be a string, and we're going to call this send active users. So we need to be passed in a set of Agora users. Now we'll need to be turning this set into a string value. So our string will start with the keyword active users followed by a space. The space is important. Then we set up a for loop to go through all the active users. And let's actually set up our return to return the user string. And within this for loop, we're going to append onto the user string. So the user string plus active users dot element at the specific index. We take their UID, turn it into a string, and then add a comma after that. So this is what our messages are going to look like. It's going to look like active users, which is the keyword we're looking for, then followed by UID, 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 UID. So okay, we're going to send out this string, but when we receive it, we actually need to parse that specific string and get that list of users again. So let's create that function here. So we want the list of Agora users. Parse active users. And we'll pass in a string of UIDs. So before this step, we will look for a space within the code that will tell us that this is active users, and we will send the string of UID, 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 UID. So this is the type of string that we're going to retrieve here. So I'm going to create a list of these strings and split them where the comma is. And we need it to be turned into Agora users so that we can use it within our app. So we'll need to loop through all the Agora users. We'll check if this is an empty string because you remember we're parsing on every comma. At the end, there will be an empty string here with nothing. So when we get to that point, we want to continue out of the for loop and keep going. But before we get to that part, we want to take all the users and we want to create Agora users from that UID. And we get that from the list of strings that we have. We parse it, turn it into an integer, and set it to our UID. And finally, we're ready to return the users. All right, that was a little bit more algorithm heavy, but hopefully this all makes sense. We're basically working with string manipulations. Now going back to the director controller. So we said we need to add it to these 4 functions. So when we add the user to lobby, we want to send out a message of these active users so that the participant can update their own screen. So we take the channel, send message, Our message is going to be Agora RTM message from text. We're going to call that message class we created and say send active users. And the active users we're going to send is the current state of active users because we already just updated that state right here. So we updated the state as new and ready to send out. Now when we promote them to active user, we can copy that same thing. There'll be a new user. But on top of that, we want to add 2 more messages. We want to unmute that person, and we want to actually enable their video as well. We don't want to have them come into the stage and their video is off and everything. That'd be a mess. So now when we're demoting them to a lobby, we want to do the opposite of this. Well, except for that last line. We still just want to update with the current state of the active users. But in this case, we want to mute that user and we want to disable their video. And lastly, when we remove the user, we'll send them the new active users as well. And we don't have to worry about muting or unmuting them because they're gone. Okay, we're getting very close to the finish line here. So next part is we want to retrieve these states with the participant side of things. I want to address those actions that are, those messages that are being sent over. We want to listen to them and do the correct thing. So remember, these messages we were sending out are channel-wide messages. So we're going to be using this section a lot. So this is where we'll see our message and which members sent it and all that stuff. So first thing we need is to parse for that space that we added. If you remember, in all of our message definitions, we have that first identifying word, either enable, mute, unmute, disable, or active users, followed by a space. So we're going to split that text into a list of strings based on where the space is. Then we can set up a switch case statement. We can look at the parse message in position 0 because we know there should be 2 positions total, the first specific word and then the rest of the message. So in the case that we need to mute, we will check the parse message in position 1. We will check if it's equal to our UID. So we need to set the state of muted to equal true, since we want to mute this person. And then since that only does it locally, like on our side of the app, we want to also let the engine know that this person has muted themselves. Now this mute local audio stream will trigger our director controller event for remote audio state changed. If it's muted or stopped, this will execute, and then the rest of the logic executes. Now you can imagine we'll have something very similar for the other cases. So we'll have the case of unmute, where this is just false, and this is false. And then we'll have the case of disable and enable. Where this will be video disabled. And this will be mute video stream. Now the last one is actually becomes pretty easy for us as well because of how we set up that parse active users function. So you get active users as the first part of that parse message. Let's add a break in here so we don't forget. All we have to do is set state and set our current users to message parse active users. UIDs is still going to be parsed message at index 1. Users can't be a setter because it's final. Who made a final? I didn't make a final. Wasn't supposed to be. Okay. So all the messages are accounted for. Now one of the last things we need here is to actually show the UI of all the users. So toolbar is pretty much done. The main thing we have to do is this broadcast view. I think I'll just copy paste this in here because again it's not the most important part of this application that we're dealing with. And this reminds me we needed one more thing to add in. So this active users. So we want to have this variable called active user to know if they're on the main page or not, because we don't want to display all the buttons. We don't want to have them the ability to mute or change their cameras if they're not even on the screen. And let's actually change this name to local user active, because we have the active users over there. I don't want to get confused. So we'll update this. And I explained that logic in a little bit, but let me update the buttons first. So we have the mute button here. We want to check if the local user is active. If he is active, then we want to display that material button. But if he's not, just display an empty size box. The end call button we do want, because we wanted them to be able to leave the call. But the video disable button we don't want. Again, same situation as above. We'll just create an empty size box. And then switch camera, we again don't want this. And if it's not active, then we want to display a sized box again. All right, so there the buttons are updated. Now let's go through the view a little bit. So this broadcast view gets all the render views that we have. In the render views function, we have a list of all the users. So we have the Agora user with the UIDs. We go through that list. If that list is equal to your own UID, then you create an RTC local surface view. So that means it takes your camera view, and that's what we're going to be using. And we're going to be putting the user's username at the bottom as well. And then, so if we already did a check to see whether you are in the active users list. So if you are, then check if local active gets set. And that's how we set the local user active thing. Otherwise, we'll use the RTC remote surface view. So this means a surface view or a video view that is not coming from your own device. And then again, same thing, we'll have the username at the bottom right. So you get these stacks of different views, and now we need to set them into a grid of what we want it to look like. So if it's 0, you take up the whole screen. If it's 2, you take up the top and bottom. And then if you have 3 or 4, you set them into their own view. And if you want or need to add even more, you can, with Agora, you can add up to 17, and I think that might be increased soon even. And these expanded views, just put this into an expanded row pretty much. So that's the UI. The core thing we want to understand here is how the Agora logic works here. The UIs I'm not as worried about. And with the Agora UI Kit, you don't even have to worry about that in the first place. So okay, let's run it. Let's see if it works. Okay, so we'll first try out the director part where we'll try to mute the people. So when we join, we'll see this blue to do again. On my side, I see only an end call button, but we'll showcase that here as well. And then when we bring the user in here, we should be able to mute them. So let's try it out. There, it works. And I can actually see on my end. We'll swap the roles around, and then I'll show you there too. But I can show you here, if we turn off the video, it makes the video off and everything's working well. Now let me show you this from a participant point of view. So if we join as a participant, we see the end call button with nothing else. So this is the lobby. We don't see anybody in the lobby, but when we try to bring the person in, you'll see we had the name director and we have that little Android emulator. And now I won't see my mouse is here. I'll click mute on the other end. And you see the state updates here to be muted. And I can turn off the video. And even though we still see it here locally because we didn't update the UI to do anything when our video is off. And we're still technically on the stage. We see the state is updated. So okay, everything seems to be working well. So last thing we need to do is add some logic to generate the color and send the name of the user to the director. And we're going to do that within the participants join channel success. So this is when you successfully join the channel on your own end. We can actually remove this users.add here because we're not relying on this anymore. The director is sending us all the information for what users we actually need to display. I actually saw a little hiccup on my second device when this first launched because I saw the screen pop up for a second and then go back to nothing because we added that user here on this join channel success, but then as soon as we received the message, we set that back to nobody. So that was a bug that would have technically been hard to spot. So let's generate a random color and then also give the name that we want to pass. So to get a random color, we're just going to do random.next double, multiply that by all the colors, and turn it into an integer. And to send these, we're going to be using a local attribute that we can get access to from the director directly. It's a good way to phrase it. So I want to add or update local user attributes. This attribute is going to be name and color. So see, these local attributes take in a list of maps. So we need to create key value pairs for the name and for the color. So the first one is the name, and then let's get the color. Color, the key will be color, and random color dot toString. ToString is what we would want to pass here. So on the director side of things, if you remember when we first joined, right here we just set it to a to-do and color is blue. Instead, we're going to get the user attributes, and we do that by asking the client for the user attributes for this specific UID. And to access them, we just get the key value pairs. We look for a name. And to set the color, we want to get the integer and then user attributes color. Okay, now unless I'm missing something, we should have colors here. So there we go, we joined. You see we got a random color. We see the name Tadas. If we leave, join back, we should get another random color, I believe, a darker green. Hopefully they're not all going to be greens. Yeah, we got a nice orange here. And if we bring them into the call, we'll see the same orange with the name down here. Seems to be working great. Nice. So all the core logic with the lobby and active users and sending RTM and RTC messages is all done. We're getting all the people within the call, and now the only thing left to do is to actually stream them out to all the other platforms. And to me, this is the most exciting part. So if you remember, we had this model set up called stream, but we never added anything to here. Let's change that. So first we're going to create an enum called stream platform. We'll add YouTube, Twitch, and other. They'll have a class called stream destination. This will have a stream platform and a URL where we want to stream. So this is a very simple class. We just want the platform and then the URL. So this section, even though it might seem like it should be complicated with Agora, again, it's not too bad. So let's close all these functions just to make our code a little bit more readable. And at the bottom here, we're going to add a couple more functions. Actually, before that, we need to update our director model too, because we're going to need to store a couple more things here. So first, we need a Boolean for isLive, so know whether we are currently live streaming or not. And then we will need a list of stream destinations, so that we know where to stream to. And then we need to update that copy with function. But again, we need defaults for that, so we're going to start out with false, and our current destination start off with 0. All right, so now that we got that data in there, we can go back to the director controller, and we can work with that now. So we'll have data for whether we are live and all the destinations we want to stream to. So the first function we're going to want is start stream. Second function will be called update stream. So if the user gets brought into the stage while the stream is live, we want to update that user. We want the ability to end stream. Then a function for publish destination, and we're going to need to import this enum as well. So add publish destination is when we click we want to publish to YouTube or Twitch, we will add that into our destinations. And then if we add it, we need an ability to remove it. So these are actually the last functions that we're going to need within our controller. One thing we want to do before diving too deep into that is whenever there's a change with the active users, we want to check if it is live, and if so, we want to update that stream. So this is the scenario when we get promoted to an active user. This is the same scenario when we demote to a lobby user, and then also the same thing if we remove the user. While this isn't always going to be the case, it doesn't hurt to update the stream just in case. So now to add published destinations. We want to give the ability for people to add a published destination while they're already live. So if you're already streaming on YouTube, you want to add it into Twitch real quick, you can do that and it should update. So here, if we check state.isLive, if we are live, we want to take the state engine and add publish stream URL. So we're passed in this URL and transcoding enabled. We'll set it to true now. I'll give a little bit more insights on what that actually means a little bit later. And then whether it's live or not live, we want to update the state with the new destination. We'll do that with copy with, then destinations, and very similar to how we did the users, we want to use the spread operation, get all the destinations, and add a new stream destination with platform, URL. So to remove a published destination, we got to do something very similar. So check if it's live. If it is, we want to remove publish stream URL. We don't need transcoding. And then we do a little bit of logic here where we loop through all the current destinations. We check for the location of the current URL that we want to remove. We remove it, and then we set the state with the new locations. And we can return. We don't need to loop through the rest of it. So that's how we add destinations, and that's how we remove destinations. And now we actually have all the data we need to finish up the UI. We have the complete director controller with all the pieces. We can finish that up. And then the last thing we're going to need to do is implement these last three functions. Then we can show you the fully working application. All right, so for the UI, we have the little section at the top where we want to add all our streams and things like that. And actually, since this is all going to be UI stuff, we can just launch this app and see our changes get updated real time. Actually, before we get into all of that, we want to wrap our custom scroll view in another widget. And this widget is actually one of the packages that we installed called Circular Menu. So let's take our custom scroll view, wrap it with a widget. We'll call it Circular Menu, just like the package wants. So items is required. That's the required field. And then instead of child, it should be background widget. So the circular menu puts basically a little floating menu thing above our whole view. So we have the items, but we can also add some things like alignment. We're gonna align it to the bottom right. We're gonna change the toggle button color to colors black 87. And might as well give it a little bit of a shadow just to give it a little extra spice. Now if we log into this director channel, we should see an error pop up because items cannot be empty. All right, I'll add some items. So in here, we're gonna need to define circular menu items. This first one's gonna be a big end call button. So whenever we wanna end that call, we will call the director notifier, leave call, and then pop out of this context. So go back to the old screen. And then the second item we'll have in here is check whether we are live or not. If we are live, add a button called end stream, where we call the end stream function that we haven't yet implemented. And if we are not live, we will call start stream. And the colors will be orange for both of them. And this one will be a video cam icon, and then this one will be a cancel icon. And then we also do a little check here before we start it to make sure that there's at least one destination where we want to start the stream to. If not, we'll throw an error called invalid URL. All right, so let's try again. And go to the director, and we should hopefully see a nice little button in the bottom right. There we go. Now if we click this button, you'll see an end call and a start live stream. So end the call will take us back to this screen and go back into the director. All right, so that section's done. Now the next is this safe area that we just left an empty container for now. So that was on purpose. We're actually gonna turn this into a row. So for this one, we're gonna use another package that we added in called the pop-up menu button. And we're gonna use it in conjunction to this modal bottom sheet as well. So the pop-up menu button takes in an item builder where we'll need to return a list of pop-up menu items. We're going to need to return this list at the end. And before we return it, we need to fill it up with all the different things we need. So this part is going to be where we're adding the actual stream destinations. And everything within here needs to be a pop-up menu item. And it will have a child and a value. And the reason we had that enumeration that we declared is because we want this value to be for YouTube. Now the child will be a simple list tile. And just like that, we have our first pop-up menu item. Then we'll add a little divider in between using the pop-up menu divider. And that's put in the wrong spot. There we go. And I'll have a little divider between the next section where we can copy paste the same thing. Call this Twitch. Make the streaming platform Twitch. And then copy this a third time to add an other field. All right, so we have our pop-up menu defined here, but there's a couple more things we need to add in. So the icon, going to use a similar icons.add, and there's some functions you can implement like on canceled, where all we'll do is just print you have canceled menu. Then we have on selected, so if you actually choose something, and this is where this value comes in very handy. We can create a switch case statement for this value. If it's a stream platform.youtube, we will do one thing. If it's Twitch, we will do something separate. And then lastly, we will have a shape of rounded rectangle border with border radius of border radius circular of 16. All right, there we go. So next big thing is when we actually picked one, we want to have a little bottom sheet pop out. So for YouTube, we will have a function called show YouTube bottom sheet, where we'll need to pass the context and the director notifier, because we'll need to access that function to add the published destination. All right, so let's create this function. We will do it up here. And before we implement this, let's go over how to actually stream something to YouTube. So when you go to YouTube, you're ready to go live. You click this go live button, and you'll have this stream key, and you'll have a stream URL. And those are two things you're going to need to do an RTMP push to YouTube. So on Twitch, you get a stream key as well, but you can go to stream.twitch.tv/ingests, and it'll tell you what the actual URL you need. So you take this URL at the beginning and then add your stream key at the end. And using those two values, you can actually RTMP push your stream to both of the platforms. So I need to input that here. Create a text editing controller with the stream URL, then copy that and have a stream key. And for this return, we actually want to return a bottom sheet here. And we get that from show modal bottom sheet. So we have the context, and within the builder, we actually need to build out this form. And nothing too complicated about this one. We just basically fill out a column with all the things that we want to add. So first add a little text, then some space between the next thing, then a text field for our stream URL, a text field for our stream key, and then a nice button at the bottom that says add, and this goes to our director notifier and does the add published destination. We add a YouTube destination. We take the stream URL, add a slash, and add the stream key to the end, and that's our URL for the stream destination. So this guide I was reading earlier had a different way to set up the Twitch stream. So they said do RTMP//Twitch ingest server /app/stream key. And the way I found this Twitch ingest server was going through OBS, but I have a feeling this would work just fine. So maybe you want to make this your URL and make it more clear to your users how this all works. But yeah, the main point of this is that your app actually gets to Twitch, so try these out, and maybe this is actually simpler to use. Just guide people to this website and then they can find it. But let's add a very similar function for Twitch. So the way I had it was using this old method with rtmp///app and then stream key. Again, just going to the direct ingest server might be easier, so feel free to update this as necessary. Okay, those two are implemented. Now we could show Twitch bottom sheet. We have context and director notifier all there. Now when we click on this, we should see these options pop up. So all right, we have this first pop-up menu button. And right after that pop-up menu button, we're gonna loop through all of the destinations and return some more pop-up menu buttons with the actual streams. So remember, the item builder needs to be a list of things, even though this is just one thing. The child will be stream button with the director data and destination for that specific one. We'll define what this stream button is in a second. And then the same three functions. We have the on canceled. You have canceled the menu. On selected, instead of adding a published destination here, we will be removing a published destination with that specific URL again, and then a very similar border. So last part of the UI, we want to add this stream button. So this will return a widget of stream button, and we're gonna pass it a stream destination. We could set up a nice switch statement depending on the platform. If it's YouTube, we want to return a container with a child text that says YouTube. Style it to be white. Give it a little bit of decoration. And then since it's YouTube, we want to make it red. Give it a little bit of padding, a little bit of margin. And there we go. So the YouTube one's defined. We'll have a very similar thing for Twitch. But instead of red here, we'll have purple. Instead of YouTube, we will have Twitch. And the rest should be the same. And then lastly, we have the other. We'll make this color black. Change this Twitch to other. Okay, so finally the UI should be done. Let's run it. So again, we have this director, channel name Tadas. Let's join it. And we'll see this nice plus icon at the top. If we click this, we'll see a bunch of options: YouTube, Twitch, other. Let's click YouTube. We'll see this pop up. Stream URL. Let's just put in for now youtube.com just as a test. Stream key, whatever. Oh, and we actually had some sort of overflow there. But anyways, add that in and we should see YouTube. We can click on YouTube to remove it. Now, let's figure out what this is all about. So we need to add this is scroll controlled and set this to true for our bottom sheets. And then we won't have that overflow problem. And we did on this one. All right. So now in this case, we go to YouTube. No overflow. Might want to add some sort of checks here, but we just want to make sure it all looks nice first. Go to Twitch. Add, and there we have multiple things, and we can remove them and add them as necessary. So UI is all there. So now the very last thing is we actually need to push this stream to our streaming platforms. And we actually have this all set up. So we have end stream and we have start stream all ready and set up to go. And we only have 3 functions to implement. There's update stream, end stream, and start stream. Update stream, you remember we called this whenever the active users changed. So that's already handled. So this is also called whenever we need. So last thing is just implement them. Let's start with the end stream because it's the easiest one. So we loop through all the destinations. And remember, to add a published destination, we do this add published stream URL. To remove, we do remove published stream URL. So all we really need to do is loop through and remove every single published stream URL. just like that. And then we set the state to state copy with is live false. And that's how you end the stream. Now for the start stream, we need to create a list of transcoding users. So if the active user is empty, we should probably do some sort of error checking. But in this case, we're gonna pretend we don't like error checking and move to state active users length equals 1. So to best showcase what we need to do with this transcoding is to look at this drawn out image. So transcoding means we need to define the width and the height of each user and where their location is within that block. So here, when we only have one, we have a user that's 1920 by 1080 and their index is 0, 0. For this one, we have 2 users. Each user will have the resolution of 960 by 1080. And this one will start at 0, 0, but this one will start at 960 and 0. And then so on we're going to do it up to 8 users. By the way, if you prefer reading through a blog, this will also be in the description. So back to the code. So this is what that looks like. So like I said, if we only have one user, the starting index will be 0, 0. Width will be 1920 by 1080. If we have 2 users, first one will start at 0, 0, 960 by 1080. Second one will start at 960, 0, 960 by 1080, and so on and so forth up to 8 users. Now then there's this live transcoding variable we need, where we pass in those transcoding users that we just defined and set the total stream height and width to 1920 by 1080. Then on the engine, we set live transcoding with the transcoding that we just declared. So that means we are now live with the transcoding with these configurations. And then similar thing as we did for the end stream, we want to do for the start stream, where we go through every destination and we want to add publish stream URL. And the second variable is whether transcoding is enabled, and it is, so we set that to true. And then is live also to true. Now last one, update stream. So for updating, we're not really changing whether we're live or not. We're not changing or adding any published stream URLs. Those are done here, right when we do the add or remove. So all we need to do is update the transcoding whenever the users get added. So copy paste all this, paste on the update stream, and that is it. That is the last line of code for the fully functioning streamer application that allows you to stream with multiple people that you have control over and allows you to stream to multiple platforms at the same time. Now I understand that some of this might have been a little bit complex, but this is a complex application, a complex use case. But I'm hoping that a lot of you, after looking at the proper resources, were able to follow along and see how Agora actually made this a lot easier than it would be to make from scratch. I honestly don't know where I would even start trying to implement this without Agora. So let's see this final product in action. We're going to run this app, and I have a YouTube account that's not the official YouTube account. And the nice thing about YouTube is it lets you see your stream here before actually going live. Unlike Twitch, it makes you go live instantly. I found this out from experience. But we'll be able to run and stream our stream to here, and we'll see all the changes update. It might not be as smooth here because I'm running an emulator on a stream, and then we'll be using 2 other devices to stream into the actual streamer app as well. So this user will be the director, so you can see this all in action. We'll use a channel named Tadas, and we'll join as director. Now we can assign the YouTube stuff right away. So you can paste that in here, and then copy, paste the stream key in here as well. Now for this one, we might want to hide it in this case, if you're live streaming this app. You don't want people to see this, of course. But for now, we don't really mind. I'll just change my stream key right after this, so you won't be able to use it. So we have added a destination. Now let's also run the same application, the iPad that I have connected, and let's open up a new instance of the terminal and run a third instance on the iPhone that was available here too. All right, so the first device is there. We'll call this username Tadas, and we'll see it show up here. And if you guys are part of the Flutter community and you know me, you probably know my good friend Robert that's also on YouTube. We'll pretend like he's the other person in here. So there we go. So let's say we bring this user in. And what I'll do is mute them right away so the 2 devices don't start echoing with each other. And all right, we should be ready to push this stream live. We click this button, it'll start live stream, and we see we have a connection here. So one thing to remember, this whole app, everything we see here is running on Agora. So this will probably be relatively fast. But when it starts going out to YouTube, and there we go, we finally see it. When it starts going out to YouTube, it's going to the CDN using RTMP, so it'll have a little bit of a delay. So now we can bring this other user in. And let's mute them here as well. And you can see it pop up here too. So our app's fully working. We're going to bring them in. We could take them out now, and it'll update just like it should. And there you go. You see this layout updates just how it's supposed to as well. So now you can add Twitch and all these other streams and stream to all of them. And if you want to enable the stream right away to both of them whenever you start streaming from the app, click this auto start, and then the Twitch one will automatically start, and then YouTube will automatically start. So there we go. That's the app I like to call Streamer. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Flutter development or just overall developer entertainment, come subscribe to my YouTube channel at Tadas Petra. If you're interested to learn more about Agora and how all this video SDK and this real-time engagement works, go subscribe to their channel at Agora. And overall, I really appreciate you watching till the end of this video. This is definitely the longest video I've ever made and probably the most complex project that I've tried to explain with a video. And I'm hoping most of you were able to keep up with it. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments, so I'll try to answer them as much as I can. And lastly, I'd like to thank freeCodeCamp for giving me this opportunity, and hopefully I'll see you around here some more.